I would now like to invite Mary Robinson to address us. Mrs. Robinson has been a member of the Irish Senate, an eminent lawyer in human rights cases, President of Ireland, and UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Since she left the UN system more than 10 years ago, she has been a tireless campaigner for global climate justice and the particular impact of climate change on the global poor. Mary Robinson.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, but you left out an important detail. I was elected to Dublin City Council at one stage, and it didn't prevent me from going forward later to be president. I'm delighted to also participate at this 8th forum of the World Alliance of Cities Against Poverty, and it's a pleasure to be on the platform with Michelle Bachelet, whom you've just heard, of UN Women, Isa Kagira of UN Habitat, and Tom Arnold of Concern. Like Michelle Bachelet, and we are longtime friends, I'm delighted that Dublin is the first city from what we call the developed part of the world to join the Safe Cities for Women programme that Michelle has so eloquently outlined. Many of us at this forum are able to empathise with what Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said last April. He said, "Our struggle for global sustainability will be won or lost in cities." And I think it was interesting listening to the voices on the video that at their heart, and it's a very obvious thing, cities are about people, and the answers have to be very people-centred. I'm going to leave out a number of the statistics I had in my preparation as well, because you've heard them. But I do want to remind us of statistics that are particularly relevant to my current work with my colleagues, because we work on climate justice. Cities contribute to climate change, with urban areas accounting for 50% of all waste, generating 60 to 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and consuming 75% of natural resources. Developing world cities, which, as you know, are growing much faster than their developed world counterparts, are particularly vulnerable to lack of resources, poverty, inequality, and vulnerability to climate change. The impacts of climate change may negatively affect the infrastructure, worsen the access to basic human urban services, and unfavorably affect the quality of life in cities. I was reminded of that not so long ago when I was in Liberia, and there was flooding in a part of Monrovia, the capital, and quite a number of people were killed, but they didn't know exactly how many, because these were invisible people in an informal part of the city. And we are hearing about the complexity of the city, composed of political, social, and cultural systems. If we discuss the use of technology and sustainability in cities, one of the key aspects must be how to involve all citizens, using democratic principles of accountability. A lot of innovation starts with the need to change something close to us. By rethinking our urban environments, we're also rethinking our society, our economy, and our culture. Professor Mark Dwyer of Trinity House, part of Trinity College, very close to here, puts it well, I think, and I want to just quote him. He says, "To understand their needs, citizens need to be engaged in a dialogue about their cities. Rather than perceiving inhabitants as the unquantifiable, messy element that interferes with a clear planning process or public policies, their participation needs to be integrated in the design and implementation processes. Creating ownership means A, asking for, listening to people's wants and needs. B, educating them concerning options and innovation. C, organizing, communicating developments effectively and seeking citizen input and feedback. And C, finding methods of incorporating this understanding into solutions." It's interesting that some truly groundbreaking work has been done in Belfast by the organisation Participation and Practice of Rights, which has been commended recently by the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva as representing best practice in making practical use locally of the international human rights system. Specifically, it pointed to the work of the Belfast-based Seven Towers Residence Group as an international best practice example of using international human rights standards to make local change. I have several times visited groups in Belfast, in various parts of Belfast, that are participating in projects of participation and practice of rights, and indeed some Dublin communities and other communities have been following that example. And it's interesting, when you meet them, you get that real sense of they've been affirmed in their dignity, they've participated, they understand the processes, they take a kind of ownership of what's happening. And this work is a great tribute indeed to its founder, Agnes McCormack, who sadly passed away last month. Across the island of Ireland, indeed across the globe, people are increasingly demanding healthy democratic participation within the state. And this isn't some abstract political concept. It's about ensuring public decisions are taken on the basis of transparency, accountability, and participation. It applies to big questions like national taxation policies as much as it does, for example, to narrow issues faced in the daily lives of the residents from the Seven Towers in Belfast, asserting their right to adequate housing. This type of healthy relationship with the state is the basis for a sustainable democratic and economic fabric tomorrow. The outcome document of the Rio conference last June, The Future We Want, acknowledged that, and I quote, "If well planned and developed, including through integrated planning and management approaches, cities can promote economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable societies." At Rio+20, governments committed to promoting an integrated approach to planning and building sustainable cities and urban settlements, including through supporting local authorities, increased public awareness, and enhancing participation of urban residents, including the poor, in decision-making. Despite that vision, I think there was a lot of disappointment in the outcomes of Rio+20, which was weak in practical outcomes, but it did reaffirm the relevance and need for rights-based, inclusive, and equitable sustainable development which encompasses in equal measure the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of human well-being. Post-2015, I believe it's essential that development be people-centered, protect human rights, and be inclusive and equitable. Those of you who've gathered from parts of Ireland, but also from far-flung parts of the world, it's wonderful to see a very diverse audience here, are empowered not only to shape this new vision of development, but to deliver it, to make sure that the world and our children and grandchildren inhabit a safe, bountiful, and filled with opportunity. Development from now on also means building climate resilience of the poorest and reducing the planetary risks by moving to ecological patterns of production, consumption, and reuse. We'll be moving to discussion of sustainable development goals, which will involve all states and all people within states, so that is different from the Millennium Development Goals. But it's clear that we will need one global integrated set of goals going forward. And from our climate justice work, when we visit poor families and poor communities, mainly in developing countries, because that's where our main focus is, there is no division. The daily reality of poverty doesn't see any divisions between the environment, which is about access to water and soil to grow food, economics, which is the ability to earn a living and access to credit, and social development, access to education, healthcare, information, and decision-making. All of these issues are linked, closely related, part of the reason why they are poor, powerless, in ill health, or hungry. So our challenge is to understand these linkages in the same way that those experiencing them do, and to design responses that solve the closely related problems. So I also would like to encourage the World Alliance of Cities Against Poverty to make sure that development post-2015 is rights-based development. It's something that is very important in a climate justice approach, an approach which links human rights, climate change, and development to achieve a people-centered response. Climate justice requires a multidisciplinary approach, enabling linkages and avoiding silos, and mirrors the three dimensions of sustainable development. I'm sure you will hear from my friend in UN Habitat about the impact that climate is having on poor communities. I've also heard this from other friends who help to organize those in the informal sector. My fellow elder, Ela Bhatt in India, who founded the Self-Employed Women's Association, more than 1.2 million women in the informal sector who are changing the power dynamic because of asserting their collective strength. My friend Sheila Patel, who's chair of the board of Shack Slum Dwellers International, SDI, describes well the particular problems of the informal sector in cities. And I quote, "The global economy is producing more informal settlements, leading to increased inequity and lack of access to basic services. Lack of documentation exacerbates social injustice at times of disaster, as people who don't have property title can't access benefits. Evictions often happen in the name of safety, and again, there's no redress for those who are invisible in the informal sector." Achieving scale in urban development policy and practice begins at the individual settlement level. When local authorities engage with informal settlement communities, residents become active partners in upgrading their built environment. When communities and authorities learn together and produce development outcomes together, they're able to reach many more communities than the top-down initiatives that some countries attempt. Further, when communities own the process of upgrading, they're able to ensure that it is sustainable and continues to grow over time. Let me just cite two examples. Residents of Uganda's slums are not strangers to severe flooding and landslides, which disrupt and destroy business, make roads impassable, decimate homes, overwhelm sanitation systems, and spur outbreaks of cholera, malaria, dysentery, and diarrhea. Throughout the slums, homes and businesses are severely damaged during rainy periods, necessitating partial rebuilding multiple times per year. Yet the work of the Ugandan Slum Developers Federation clearly illustrates that when the urban poor are organized and informed about climate change, they can play a central role in mitigating its impacts upon their environment. The Federation is a network of 343 community groups that save daily, work in partnership with local authorities, and mobilize their members to improve living conditions in slums. A health and hygiene committee in each community is mobilizing members and the wider community to dispose of waste thoughtfully and work with local authorities on municipal-wide initiatives. These initiatives make a visible difference in some of the largest slums and greatly mitigate the risk of flooding by clearing drainages and encouraging residents to keep them litter-free. Community projects make briquettes from organic waste, recycle plastic waste, and reuse discarded materials to make crafts. In Jinja, the Federation is using innovative soil-compressed interlocking brick technology to construct quality and weather-resistant houses for members. The Federation shares information gathered during citywide enumeration about waste management practices and sanitation services in each of the cities of operation, with local authorities ensuring that targeted and effective strategies for climate change adaptation are jointly implemented. Moving to Asia, another part of the world, another good example of local participation is the Dampa Federation in the Philippines, a federation of 217 grassroots organizations with a membership of almost 80,000 urban poor families, representing over 500,000 people. The Federation aims to improve solutions to basic urban poverty issues, including appropriate and affordable housing, demolition and relocation, income generation, and livelihood development and resilience building programs. Large areas of Manila, and indeed neighboring cities, Quezon and Navotas, are reclaimed land and have seen significant development of high-rise buildings in recent years. During the rainy season, rainfall levels have become unpredictable, with long, sustained periods of heavy rain causing severe flooding in the city's streets. Poor communities living along the banks of the rivers and creeks are particularly vulnerable. And the way in which people living within the Parola compound of Manila have organized is truly remarkable. They've held dialogues with the relevant community government agencies. Together, they're working to improve their resilience and adapt to climate change by building flood-resistant housing and developing an early warning system for flooding, a system that's based on the local knowledge of older members of the community on flood prediction. quick response teams trained to raise the alarm and get people to move to evacuation centres during times of extreme weather and disaster have been established. Alternative sources of income have been developed, including the production of food in urban gardens. You know some of this from your own experience in the cities that you work in, that you live in, that you seek to improve. And you've decided, and it has been, I think, an important decision, that there will be a focus on technology at this forum. I hope that this will bring out and emphasize bottom-up approaches to sustainability. As we've heard, there will be over 50 global stories of hope, which will demonstrate how technology can make a difference. And I welcome the commitment of the cities represented here in the forum to work with each other to develop solutions to their urban challenges. And I join with the Lord Mayor in hoping that there will be more city-to-city cooperation of that sort. In conclusion, my core message is that technology and urban planning need to be grounded in human rights and gender-sensitive values. In this way, they can actively enable transparency, accountability, and participation by the urban poor in promoting solutions which enhance human dignity. And as a former president of the country, I'd like to conclude by joining with Minister Joe Costello, the Lord Mayor, and the Irish speakers so far in extending to you that Céad Míle Fáilte. I hope you've understood it's quite extensive. It's 100,000 welcomes. We are really happy that you're here. This is an important global forum, and we're proud that Dublin City Council and the other organisers are locating it here in Dublin, and we hope that you benefit from it and also enjoy it. Thank you very much indeed.